Okay, what if I told you that our entire universe, from the tiniest particle to the biggest galaxy, isn't really running on the laws of physics? What if it's all just code? Sounds crazy, right? Well, today we're diving into a brand new theory that says exactly that. And it all started with a super strange mystery that popped up in a physics lab.
I mean, really think about that for a second. Is reality just a program? It feels like something straight out of a movie, doesn't it? But this question is now at the heart of some serious, cutting-edge science. The idea that everything you see, everything you touch, is just the output of some deep, universal program. And our whole investigation today, it kicks off with one totally unexpected clue. So you might think a story this big starts out in deep space, looking at galaxies or black holes. But no, this one starts with, well, with a piece of rock. Seriously, a crystal, to be exact. A crystal of an element called tellurium. And this crystal started sending out a signal that was so bizarre, it basically shattered what we thought we knew about physics.
All right, so here's what happened. Scientists were running an experiment. They shined a light on this tellurium crystal while it was sitting in a magnetic field. Super standard stuff. They expected a nice, boring, predictable result. But they got this. Look at that graph. The signal coming from the crystal, that's the dotted line, it didn't just stay stable, it exploded. It grew exponentially, like some kind of runaway feedback loop. And let me be clear, based on everything we know about physics, that should be impossible. It's just not supposed to happen.
But here's the kicker. This wasn't just static or random noise. No way. Buried deep inside the math describing that crazy signal, they found clues. Two very specific numbers, let's call them fingerprints, that could perfectly explain this wild behavior. Suddenly, the race was on to figure out what on earth these numbers actually were.
And it turned out, these weren't just some random numbers that only apply to this one weird crystal. Oh no, they were clues to something way bigger, a massive cosmic puzzle. So the next logical step was to figure out, okay, what are these fingerprints? What do they actually do?
Okay, let's meet our first suspect. We'll call it beta code, but an easier way to think of it is the amplifier. This is the number that controls that insane exponential growth we just saw. The bigger the amplifier number, the faster and crazier that signal just takes off. It's literally the engine driving that wild curve on the graph.
And the second fingerprint? That's chi code, or the twist. Now this is really cool. The atoms in tellurium are arranged in a spiral, kind of like a corkscrew. This gives the whole crystal a handedness. Just like your left and right hands are mirror images of each other. The twist is a number that describes how that physical, structural twistiness interacts with the magnetic field. It connects the deep-down structure of the crystal to the signal it's spitting out.
So, the scientists crunched the numbers from the experiment, and they figured out the exact value for the amplifier, for beta code. And that value was 0.25. A nice, clean, simple number that somehow described the absolute chaos happening in that crystal. But the real story, the part that changes everything, isn't what the number did in the crystal. It's where else that exact same number had shown up before.
And right here, this is where our little lab-based detective story just explodes onto a cosmic scale. Because that number, 0.25, it wasn't some new discovery. Physicists had seen it before.
Oh yeah, they'd definitely seen it before.
You gotta understand, physics is a huge field with all these different specialties. You've got the people who study materials like crystals in a lab, that's condensed matter physics, and then you have particle physicists who are smashing atoms together trying to figure out the fundamental building blocks of reality. These two groups, their worlds almost never ever overlap. Well, until now.
And here it is, the big reveal. The value for the amplifier that they measured in that little tellurium crystal, 0.25, was identical to a number that particle physicists were using in their totally separate theories. And what were they using it for? Only to explain one of the biggest mysteries in all of physics, why neutrinos, these tiny little ghost particles that zip through everything, even have mass in the first place. For these two numbers to match up perfectly, the odds are just astronomical. This can't be a coincidence.
Just look at this chart. It really hammers the point home. It doesn't matter what scale you're looking at. The super tiny nuclear scale, the weird world of neutrino physics, or a tabletop lab experiment with a tellurium crystal. That number, beta code, is always the same, 0.25. It's like we stumbled upon a fundamental constant of nature that was hiding right under our noses, connecting these completely different realms of reality.
Okay, so when you find a connection this impossible, it's screaming for an explanation, right? You can't just ignore it. And that explanation has arrived, and it's a completely revolutionary new theory of, well, pretty much everything. Now, the theory has a very long formal name, GTWSSF, USC, GTCW. But let's just focus on its core idea, which is incredibly powerful. It's called the Universal Structural Code, or USC for short. And what it suggests is simple but profound. The reason that same number, 0.25, shows up in a crystal and in the physics of a tiny particle is because they are both being run by the exact same underlying code.
So let's unpack that, because it's a huge idea. Here are the basics. First, the theory says all physical reality, everything, is just a projection, kind of like a 3D movie projected from a 2D film. Second, this projection isn't random. It's being run by this universal structural code. Third, the code operates on something called the metafield, which is like a global information field that underlies everything. And this is the mind-blower. It means that the things we thought were the most fundamental parts of our universe, like the mass of a particle or the value of a constant, they aren't fundamental at all. They're just outputs generated by the code. There's a quote from the original paper that just nails it. It says, "This is a shift from a parameter-driven to a code-driven description of nature." Think about it. For centuries, physics has been this quest to find the universe's settings, the fundamental knobs and dials. This theory comes along and says, nope, you're looking at it all wrong. There are no settings, there's just the code, and everything else is just what the code spits out. It's a total paradigm shift.
So what's the payoff for thinking this way? Let's go back to that neutrino mass mystery. For years, our best theory, the standard model, has used this really complicated, kind of tacked-on idea to explain it, called the seesaw mechanism. It works, but it feels clunky. The universal code theory just sweeps that away. It says the neutrino's mass isn't some weird arbitrary number we have to patch in. It's something that just naturally emerges from the code itself, and it's the very same code that's making that tellurium crystal light up in a weird way. How elegant is that?
Look, a wild new theory is great. It's exciting. But for it to be actual science, it has to do one crucial thing. It has to be testable. It needs to make concrete predictions that other scientists can go out and try to prove right or prove wrong.
And this, right here, is what makes this universal code idea so incredibly powerful. It's not just some cool philosophical what-if story. It's a predictive machine. It doesn't just look backwards and explain that one weird result in tellurium. It looks forward. It predicts that we should see similar weird effects in other materials, and it tells us exactly what we should be looking for. Check out this table. This is where the rubber meets the road. The theory said we should see a 12 times signal growth in tellurium. Bam! Confirmed! But it didn't stop there. It makes brand new predictions. An 8 times growth in alpha quartz, a 15 times growth in cinnabar, and 11 times growth in selenium. These aren't vague guesses. They are hard, specific numbers that physicists can go into their labs and test tomorrow. And that leads us to this, the ultimate cliffhanger. On the left, that's the real data from the tellurium experiment, a perfect match for the theory. And on the right, that's the prediction. That's the exact signal shape the code says we should see coming from a quartz crystal. Those experiments are being planned as we speak. If the data they get matches that graph on the right, well, that's the ballgame. It would change everything we know.
So what's really at stake here? Why does this matter so much? Well, if these predictions hold up, it would prove this code is universal across all matter. For the first time ever, we'd have a solid experimental bridge connecting the bizarre world of particle physics with the everyday materials we can hold in our hands. The potential for new technologies, from quantum computing to who knows what else, is just staggering. And this theory would immediately become one of the most successful, experimentally proven theories beyond our current standard model.
And that leaves us with one final, absolutely mind-bending question to chew on. If our reality is, in fact, the output of a universal code, and if we've just stumbled upon the first keys to understanding it, then the question we have to ask ourselves isn't just, can we read the code? The real question, the ultimate question, becomes, can we learn to rewrite it?